Suspension of disbelief. Suspension of disbelief was first introduced under that name back in 1817 by a dude called Samuel Taylor Coleridge. His idea was that a writer could sort of put the reader in a world that wasn't necessarily bound by the laws of our normal world. A common way of applying suspension of disbelief is what is, with a fine word, is called cognitive estrangement. To properly explain what that is, let's look at Bleach. Bleach, a series where a young teenager named Ichigo finds out that there is a thing known as a world of the dead, complete with soul reapers and demon-like creatures. This is all something the world at large don't know about. In other words, we don't know about the life after death. This is where cognitive estrangement comes into play. Because we don't know what happens after death, so who's to say that there aren't soul reapers fighting demons when we are not looking? Let's look at Superman. Who is to say that there isn't an alien race that looks just like us, but are super strong and can fly and shoot laser beams from their eyes? That is what cognitive estrangement is. It is using our lack of knowledge to shape the written universe. The Marvel and DC comics are all perfectly good examples of suspension of disbelief and the cognitive estrangement. I can't recall a single one of their comics where they just flat out expect us to believe that, oh, everyone is swinging around the city with spiderweb. You never see a guy who can just shoot laser from his eyes without anyone telling how it was made possible. That is the hard thin line between suspension of disbelief and expecting your readers are retards who can't even properly use safety scissors and finger paint. Let's have an example up in this bitch, and I'm just gonna be a self-absorbed content-used tank as an example. Now, who's to say that there wasn't a magical sword who turned Gish super strong? I mean, there's tons of secret magical artifacts in the World of Warcraft. To think that there isn't one that makes someone super strong, well, that might just be the crazy thing to believe. The same thing goes for the LFG. Who's to say that there wasn't made places where people would wager on who won a fight and who didn't? I'm simply using cognitive estrangement to make my universe within the Warcraft universe. Now, to fuck it up would probably be if I claimed that, say, Wills had become king or Sully had killed Thrall, though I promise the death would be better than this shit. Anyway, suspension of disbelief is the perfect tool to make an unrealistic comic or story. Authors doing that should focus on learning how to do it properly, because if you fuck that up, your entire premise will fall to the ground. Now remember, cognitive estrangement and suspension of disbelief aren't the same thing. Cognitive estrangement is just one way of infusing suspension of disbelief. But the reason I mention it is because it is by far, in my humble opinion, the best way to go. Because who's gonna prove you otherwise? The big problem with the term suspension of disbelief is that in the later 20th century it got thrown around more loosely and in the process lost its original meaning. Or, well, it still means the same thing, but now suspension of disbelief means that the reader needs to apply it and the author doesn't have to introduce it properly. This is a wrong assumption. It is the author's job to ensure that the reader can suspend their disbelief and believe the shit you write. This has been a Risers Author School segment to help you write out your story with a little more skill.